thank you for inviting me. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both UK Aid as well as CPI for carrying out this piece of work, which is required. In Pakistan, the problem has essentially always been lack of empirical data, which can be quantified across various factors, and not just those being dictated by certain large players in the industry. Secondly, and I'll pick up from this point, is that one of the reasons this parliamentary trip to Afghanistan was planned is that we don't see evidence of planned regional integration in Pakistan, and we haven't seen it for the last 20 years. We've been on hit and trial sort of international trade experiment, but our fears, unfortunately, tend to get the better of us. I'm right now focusing on, although of course I understand that the COVID scenario or the COVID background is, I'm aware that the context of this entire study was COVID. And as you rightly mentioned, that this, the COVID impact on trade, on business, on commerce has been devastating. And this is for the entire world. And Pakistan is one of these few countries that has been lucky enough to pick up quicker. I'm sorry, I keep on getting disconnected. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
All right. So for some reason, I get disconnected from this side. So long and short of it is that I feel that the pandemic has thrown up old challenges, not new ones. And I'll illustrate my point with an example. If you recall, Pakistan was made a part of the EU's generalized system of preferences as of the 1st of January 2014. And if you recall, midway through the term of the previous government, so that would have been 15 and a half. So at some point, late 2015, early 2016, we still hadn't been able to pick up on the space that was provided to us by the EU, i.e. we could only fulfill 50% of the supply side capacity of the tariff preferences that the EU gave us. And that's because our traditional focus was on the same 6 or 7 product basket, and we don't diversify. Now, as a member of the government, of course, I'd be in a defensive mode, but because I'm a member of parliament, and therefore I have more than one constituent, I don't only represent the businesses, but I also represent the consumer, I represent the youth, I represent the deprived, and I represent the small and medium sector as well. So for me, I think the biggest takeaway is that, unfortunately, I mean, however much I could lay blame on the government, and I could give you points from the previous government's failures, my own government's inability to seize what may have been the moment if pandemic hadn't come along. I think my discussion is going to focus on the inability of the private sector to keep up with the rest of the world. And by the rest of the world, I don't mean the United States or the Koreas. I mean the Bangladeshis. I mean the Philippines, I mean the Thailand. Thailand is able to export autos from Thailand and Pakistan is not. Our trade has always been stagnant. We have always sought protection, and that is completely justified. If we are to seek protection from the government, from competition, we shield ourselves while we're a niche industry. But no industry remains a niche industry for 40 years. And I think the previous excuses of creating jobs, we saw how quickly those jobs disappeared or evaporated during the pandemic because people not wanting to compromise on, and quite understandably so, that's how business operates, not wanting to compromise on profits, they cut down on personnel. So it's not as if those yielded any long-term results. And I think that's the both policy paradigm or the analysis paralysis that we find ourselves in. In addition, there's one very important point that has been missed consistently by this government, by the previous one. For 40 years, we have not looked at environmentally friendly goods. Thank God, with the advent of the new climate division in charge, Aslam Sahib, the new electric vehicle auto policy, and many other things they're working on. This is something we could have done as early as 2014-15, when the EU GSP Plus used to encourage us for green goods. And I don't know if you'll recall, Dr. Bakar, at that time, there was a huge fight in the WTO on the definition of what constitutes an environmental good. And I recall that even something as simple as a tap that doesn't leak was listed as an environmentally friendly good by the government of Japan at the time at the WTO. This I'm talking about 2008, 2010 era. So when we got the GSP Plus and had we scaled up During 2013-14, we could have easily picked up on tech products, digital products, and I mean exports. We could have picked up on green products, and we didn't. So in addition to the most at that time, and that was the PML and government, for no reason for me to defend them, but the most they could have done for the suppliers in Pakistan, for the traders, for the exporters, for the industrialists, was to create a conducive atmosphere and get them those preferences. Now, if the private sector couldn't or chose not to engage in those goods, and other countries did, it's Pakistan's loss, not the private sector's loss. But at the same time, we lose out where the market competition is concerned. So the point that has been raised in your report, that there are discerning buyers in the world, and not just in the West, everywhere. But that's been around for nearly 20 years now. And still the private sector didn't pick up on that. We lost if you recall, textile exports from JCPenney and Disney. This was back in 2014 as well, because of working conditions that workers were facing in Pakistan, the supply chain quality, the SPS and the TBTs of the world. But what I'm saying is that we seem to keep on missing the boat, and we seem to keep on missing the signaling that the world is engaged in. And we continue to, and I'm sorry if I sound harsh, but the idea is we can't keep on relying on subsidies. And recall one thing, Dr. Saib, we've been in difficult times for a while now. We had the war against terror. Before that, we had General Zia. Before that, we had General Yahya. Then we had General Musharraf. So there's never been a stable period for Pakistan. And I doubt it will be there, because Kashmir continues to be a problem. India-Kashmir continues to be a problem. Hopefully with Afghanistan, Iran, we're going to have better relations, inshallah. But these are our immediate neighbors. And so if you can't build peace with your neighbor to the east, which is India, a growing economy, why have we ignored the Caucasus? Why don't we look towards a market that is ready for you, the Carrick region, which is looking for the simplest products we can make? They look for pharma, they look for textile, and they look for agriculture, food and agriculture. And look at our investment in food and agriculture, again, over the last 40 years. We're lucky we're working with the Speaker's National Assembly Committee on Agriculture Products, given that agriculture and food, as well as labor, are provincial subjects now. But I guess what I'm saying is this is an excellent report, but I think SDPI and UK aid would be well. I know we're in COVID times, but perhaps I could request that during or post Ramadan, when things settle down, when the COVID pandemic third wave is a little bit better, we should have a very serious sit-down discussion. Somebody needs to read this report and understand that what has brought us here will take us no further. South Africa is a country which is now 27 years old, and their exports at the age of 25 was $25 billion. We are 75 years old, more or less, and we're still at 25 billion. So there's something we're not doing right inconsistently. So while there's many different governments that have come in, many different governments that have different policies, one could criticize the government, either the previous ones or ours, and say, well, you've all failed. But what about the role of the private sector? Have they been successful in making sure that the world wants to buy from Pakistan? As I said, the government, where we have terrible statistics, whether you look at cost of doing business, ease of doing business, but that's one side of the debate. What about the private sector? So I think I want to end there. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you, Dr. Waqar.